Hi there, welcome back to our little handmade home. My name is Tanya and it is my goal to help you stitch your way into any handmade home. Today we're working on another classic quilt block, the 9 patch. This is one that you're going to use time and again, and it's a good one to perfect as much as we can perfect anything in quilting. So let's get started. Today we're looking at another foundational block for quilting, and that is the 9 patch. As the name implies, it is a collection of 9 squares. These are charm packs that I had in my cupboard. And again, you might recognize this fabric from my 12 Days of Christmas. So let's look at a couple of different ways that you can make a 9 patch quilt block. When you go to make a 9 patch, the typical layout is 5 of one fabric and 4 of another. You can definitely change it up if you want, especially if you plan to do a disappearing 9 patch, which we'll talk about in a different video. You can change this color. You could leave the 5 the same. You could reverse them. If you could have your lights on the outside in the center and the 4 could be dark. Or you could make a scrappy 9 patch. You could have a white here, you could have a red here, and a red here. You can do all sorts of things. The fundamental piecing of this is the 9 squares. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and sew this. Now the way I like to do these, there's a couple of different things you can do. You can chain these quite easily because you'll be sewing these 2 together, these together, and these together. And then once you sew those, you can press open and then you would attach these. You could do it the other direction too if you like. You could sew them this way, press them, open it up, and then sew the bottom row. And the way I like to press these is I set my seams as I'm going, but I don't actually press the seams until I have complete rows. So we're going to go ahead and stitch these together. So I'm going to start by stitching my top row, followed by this row, and then this row. When I press my seams, typically I press all my seams towards a dark fabric. However, when you're making a 9 patch, it's nice to have nesting seams. So for the top row, I'm going to press all my seams to the right. For the second row, I'm going to press to the left, and the bottom row, I'm going to press to the right again. That way, when I put my rows together to create my block, I'm going to have nice nested seams. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch them, and then we'll look at the pressing. So you can see that I have put my 3 rows together. Now I haven't pressed the seam. So as I was saying, what I'm going to do is I am going to press all of these ones to the right. I'm going to press these ones to the left and these ones to the right again. That way I'm going to get nice nesting seams. Now I'm using a dry iron for this. Don't use steam because you don't want your blocks to be misshapen. It's going to be that way so you can feel the ridges. So of course this one is going to be the opposite direction. And I don't pull on the fabric, I simply spread it out a little bit. So this way, when we go to put our rows together, you'll have a natural meeting point for your fabrics. You can see how it nests in there just perfectly. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch my rows together, and then we'll come back and we'll take a look at the finished product. So you can see how using your nesting seams really gives you nice clean corners. And that is a basic 9 patch. So now we're going to look at another way. If you have a lot of them to do, especially if they're smaller, let's look at a different way to make those. I'm a big fan of finding time-saving techniques. So in this case, I have jelly rolls that I'm going to use. What we can do is we can stitch these together in rows like this, and that's going to create our top row and our bottom row of our patch. However, in order to make the center rows, you need to sew your strips in the opposite direction. So if this is our top and bottom, our center will be sewn like this. So you can see that we've got this pattern with blue, red, blue, and then we have red, blue, red, just as we have on our larger square. So when you sew your strips together, you can cut them down into your rows and then stitch them together that way. As I say, it works really well if you have a lot of them to do, and especially if you're working with smaller sizes. Your strips can be any size. I do find that when you get up to 5 inches or bigger for your original squares, it's just as easy to sew them this way. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these strips together, and then we'll take a look at how to cut them. So I've stitched my strips together, and as you can see, I have pressed them in different directions, again, so that they'll nest. So what you want to do at this point is we're going to cut strips. Now, you have to remember to cut your strip as wide as one of your original starting strips. Don't use the measurements that you have here. You have to start wider to give you the seam allowance. I was using a jelly roll, so I know that I have 2.5 inch starting strips. So that's what I'm going to cut. I'm going to cut strips of 2.5 inches on these. This method is especially helpful if you want to do a lot of them with alternating patterns. So again, just as the large one, you're going to stitch your rows together by nesting your seams and then creating your blocks. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So there you have 2 quick and easy ways to make a classic 9-patch block for all your projects. Thanks again for joining me for this tutorial of a 9-patch quilt block. As always, my favorite tools and resources are listed down below, as well as any links that I think you might find interesting. Be sure to tune in again next week when we're going to discover even more classic quilt blocks. I'll see you then.